There are moments in life that catch you off guard, completely unprepared, leaving you unsure of what to do. And I was in one of those moments. I was lingering in the kitchen sipping my morning coffee. Charles was as always sitting in the living room buried in his newspaper. He was so quiet that I could almost forget someone else was even in the house. Same routine for years. The same lack of interest. I used to feel younger, more passionate, but now Charles might not notice, but inside I was still a woman who craved excitement. His indifferent glances had slowly started to smother the spark inside me. But me, I knew I could still feel alive as these thoughts swirled in my head. I lifted the cup to my lips, lost in thought, and then my hand slipped. Ah, damn it, I muttered, gasping as the hot coffee spilled right down the center of my chest. The burning liquid hit my skin, making me jump in panic. I grabbed a napkin, trying to wipe the mess away, but it was useless. I could already feel the fabric sticking to me. I had to take this off without a second thought. My hands went to the buttons of my shirt. One by one, they came undone. The cool air brushing against my bare skin sent a shiver through me. I pulled the shirt off, tossing it onto the kitchen counter, and started dabbing at my skin, trying to clean myself up. My heart was racing, maybe. From the heat of the coffee, maybe. From the sudden exposure, I turned to leave, heading out of the kitchen to grab a fresh outfit I'd change in the bathroom. But just as I reached the doorway, my eyes caught something across the way in the kitchen, right across from mine, Danny's house, and in that moment, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Danny was standing there looking right at me through the window. Our eyes met. I saw the surprise in his gaze, the brief moment of hesitation, and just like that my breath hitched, something strange rippled through me. Danny had been alone for a long time, but he was always well, groomed, put together. Charming. We talked here and there, realized we had a lot in common, but there was always this invisible line between us, and now it felt like that line had completely vanished. I quickly looked away, turning toward the bathroom. A nervous energy twisted inside me, but was it just embarrassment or was it something else? Our eyes met. I saw the surprise in his eyes, the brief hesitation in that moment. My breath caught, a strange wave rippled through me. Danny had been alone for a long, long time, but he always took care of himself, well-groomed, charismatic. We had talked from time to time, realized we had a lot in common, but there had always been an invisible line between us, and now it felt like that line had completely disappeared. I quickly looked away and headed to the bathroom. There was a nervous flutter inside me, but was it just embarrassment, or was it something else? As soon as I stepped inside, I pulled off my shirt and tossed it into the laundry basket. The warmth of the spilled coffee still lingered on my chest, but that wasn't what was really burning me. I gripped the edge of the sink and looked into the mirror. My eyes looked a little dazed, my cheeks slightly flushed. What was I doing? It was an accident. That's all, but that weird feeling stirring inside me, what was I supposed to do with it? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, and walked out of the bathroom, heading straight to my bedroom, opening the wardrobe. I grabbed a random shirt, white button-up, but not as fitted as my old ones over time. I had slowly let go of the habit of wearing tight clothes, but now, thinking about the way that old shirt had clung to me, maybe I needed that feeling again. I picked out a knee-length skirt and a beige cardigan as I got dressed. Danny's face kept flashing in my mind. That look, he had just stood there watching me. Was it shame? I was feeling maybe a little. But there was something else too. As I buttoned up my shirt, the turmoil inside me only grew stronger. Should I tell Charles about this? Should I share it with him, telling my husband, who hadn't really seen me in years, who had become distant, who had made himself invisible in my life, felt ridiculous? But deep down, I wanted a reaction from him. I wanted him to feel something, to get jealous, to claim me. I made my decision. Leaving the bedroom, I walked slowly toward the living room. Charles, as usual, was buried in his newspaper, barely acknowledging my presence. I barely looked at him anymore because to him I was invisible. Something twisted inside me, but I kept going. Just as I opened my mouth to say, "Charles, I need to tell you something," the doorbell rang. I flinched. Charles didn't even lift his head. His body, weighed down by years of, sank deeper into the couch. "Daisy, can you get that?" he mumbled, his voice dull, taking a deep breath. I turned toward the door. When I opened it, I found Danny standing there, and in that moment everything went silent. Before Danny takes this story in an entirely different direction, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, you'll be on the edge of your seat till the very end, and don't forget to drop a comment. Danny locked eyes with me. He was studying me, but not in some casual way. It was like he wanted a closer look at what he'd just seen through the window. Focus deliberate. Danny was 58, but he never looked it. Youth had settled into his body, into the way he carried himself. You could tell he worked out. Broad shoulders, strong posture, tanned, healthy skin. He was wearing a navy blue button-up slightly open at the collar, paired with dark-fitted pants. Looking at him like this, I could have easily believed he was 45, and me for a second. I felt old, but at the same time I was being noticed. Danny's gaze lingered a little longer. He looked at the slight opening of my shirt, my neck, then my face, and in that moment I finally understood what I had felt back in the bathroom. Was being missed. A shiver ran through me, but it didn't make me uncomfortable. If anything, it brought me back to life just as Danny was about to say something. Charles's voice called out from behind me. "Danny, is that you, buddy?" Danny lifted his head and glanced inside. I, on the other hand, stood frozen in place. "Come on in, man. Make this old guy feel a little younger." Charles chuckled lazily. Danny's eyes flicked back to me. And in that moment we both understood the irony of what Charles had just said, because with him I actually did feel younger. But how dangerous was that feeling? As Charles and Danny sat in the living room chatting, I was in a completely different world. My eyes kept darting toward Danny, stealing glances. But every time I caught him looking at me too, and it wasn't just some casual glance. He saw me. I could feel it, that he wanted to see more than he had an hour ago, that he was looking closer, looking on purpose, and that thought sent a storm raging inside me. As Charles talked, I found myself watching Danny's face, his eyes the faintest smirk at the corner of his lips, the polite nods as he listened, but there was something else, like he was just going through the motions, just playing along. It didn't feel like he was here because of Charles, and the moment I realized that, something inside me just broke. I wanted to talk right then. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't, because he didn't either. He just looked at me for a long time, and there was something in that look, like patience finally running out, like a storm about to hit. I didn't know exactly what I was feeling in that moment, but I knew one thing: there was no stopping that storm anymore. The day dragged on forever. Hours passed, but the tension inside me didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. By the time evening came, I went back to the living room and found Charles passed out on the couch. He didn't notice me. Didn't even feel my presence, whether I was there or not. It didn't make a damn difference, but Danny noticed, and where that realization was going to lead, I had no clue. I barely slept that night. My head was a mess, my body restless, but underneath all that, there was this strange, easy thrill. It wasn't just nerves, it was something deeper, something I didn't quite understand yet. And the next day, everything felt even heavier. Charles got up, did his usual lazy-ass morning routine, ate his breakfast and left. I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't need to. I already knew he was with David. He always was. And when he went there, he usually didn't come back. But me, I was looking for a different answer. Now, why had Danny knocked on that door? Was it really to see Charles, or was it to start something that day? The house felt empty, hollow. Time dragged. I just stood by the kitchen window, staring outside, feeling this weird kind of unease. I couldn't put a name to it, but it was there. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. Danny. Just two words: "You can come over." I held my breath. Read it again and again. My heart started racing. "You can come over." What the hell did that mean? No explanation, no reason, just an invitation. I thought about whether I should go or not, but deep down I already knew my answer. Hours later, around 7 in the evening, I found myself standing at his door, storms raging inside me, when Danny opened the door. His eyes were glowing even in the dark, but the real shock hit me when I stepped inside. The lights in the living room were dim. My eyes drifted to the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The table was set carefully for two, and the smell coming from the kitchen. Danny had cooked. I stood there for a few seconds, frozen. I wasn't expecting this. He had already made a plan. Danny Wed walked out of the kitchen and came closer, holding 2 glasses. As he handed me one, his eyes locked onto mine. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice deep and steady. Like always, I let out a breath, my nervousness, my surprise, but most of all, that overwhelming feeling inside me. It shook me. I hadn't come here thinking about this. But now, sitting at this table with Danny, with everything he was making me feel, it was more real than ever. As we ate, sipping our wine, Danny talked, captivating, effortless. He told stories, made me laugh, kept his eyes on mine the entire time, and I felt like I was being pulled into his world. Then the Conversation circled back to that moment. The coffee accident in the kitchen. I looked at him. He gave me a small, knowing smile, took a sip of his wine, and then his eyes locked onto mine again. "I got to ask you something, Daisy," he said as strange. Nervous flutter ran through me that morning, he continued. "I couldn't take my eyes off you, and you noticed, didn't you? I held my wine glass, but suddenly my hand felt sweaty. Yeah, I had noticed, and right now I could feel that." Forbidden moment in the kitchen. Coming back to life, I gripped my glass a little tighter, feeling a rush of emotions swirl inside me this moment, this night. How did we get here so fast? I locked eyes with Danny. At that moment, I felt bad. I said, my voice slightly shaky. "But then you came to us, you looked at me in a way that gave me courage, and that wasn't enough. You sent me a message. And now this dinner, this conversation, this attention, everything feels so different." Danny didn't say a word, but I saw it in his eyes. He had made a decision slowly. He reached across the table and took my hand. Then he pulled me toward the center of the living room. He pressed a button, and a soft melody filled the room. Jazz old but timeless, his eyes locked on to mine. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" I held my breath. I just gave a small nod. Danny placed his hand on my waist. Pulling me close, I could feel the warmth of his body when his hands lightly traced my back. I realized my whole body shivered. The dance was slow, rhythmic, and dangerous. At some point, we weren't even moving anymore. We were just getting closer, and then his eyes dropped to my lips. Our breaths mixed. We stayed like that, waiting, even though we both already knew what was coming. And then without hesitation, Danny pressed his lips against mine. Everything I had been trying to control all night broke free with that kiss. By the time the dance was over, we were both breathless. Danny's hands were still on my waist, and mine were pressed against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat just like he could feel mine this time. There was nothing standing between us. I lifted my head slightly to look at him. The fire inside me, I couldn't deny it anymore. This time it's not a coffee accident, I said. My eyes locked onto his this time. There's no window between us, no distance. As my words hung in the air, my fingers slowly moved to the buttons of my shirt. When I undid the first one, I noticed Danny held his breath when I undid. The second, I noticed he still hadn't moved his hands from my waist, and by the third I knew there was no going back. As I kept unbuttoning, my last bit of hesitation melted away. I was here fully. I looked at him. "You look so young," I said, my voice no longer shaking. Instead, it was filled with this new burning confidence. "But at the same time, you're so strong, your body is so big, so powerful." Danny never took his eyes off me. He gave me a small smile, but there was so much more behind it. "And you're a romantic man," I continued, my fingers reaching the last button. "But at the same time, you're so damn handsome, so charismatic." It felt like with that sentence, the last wall inside me had crumbled. I slowly slid my shirt off my shoulders and let it fall to the side as Danny's gaze lingered on me. A warmth spread through my body. Then I reached for the zipper of my skirt right in front of his eyes. I slowly pulled it down. I took a deep breath and walked over to the couch, lowering myself onto it. Danny followed me with his eyes. But by now, everything was clear tonight. There was no distance between us without taking his eyes off me. Danny slowly got rid of his clothes. Every movement was calm and confident, but I could feel the storm raging inside him as he stepped toward me. Every inch of my body tensed, as if I had been waiting for him all along. He placed one knee beside my legs, closing the space between us. His face was so close to mine now, his warm breath grazing my skin, his chest almost touching mine. Then he pressed his lips against mine. His kiss was open, intense, and strong. It woke something inside me, something that made me forget everything else, something that made me feel like I belonged completely to him. It was like he had taken full control in the middle of the kiss. I opened my eyes and looked at him. When he noticed the smile spreading across my face, he parted his lips slightly. "Thanks for the compliments, Daisy," he said, his voice deep low, almost a whisper. "But trust me, there's so much more to you than that." His fingers slid to my waist, and then suddenly he pulled me hard against him. My whole body was pressed up against his warmth, his strength wrapping around me. I tilted my head back slightly, my breathing uneven. "And he whispered, bringing his lips close to my ear, "I want to feel this even closer." At that moment, I felt something huge inside me. I let out aloud, "Danny," and then I added, "This is so beautiful." Everything I feel is so beautiful. You are so beautiful. I was practically rambling. It felt like my body was being pulled up by a string from the ceiling. The higher my body rose, the more I lost myself, and my eyes never left Danny's body. I let go of the couch. I had been gripping tightly and placed my hands on Danny's shoulders, slowly sliding them down his back. Danny, breathless, said, "I don't feel alone anymore." I pressed my hands against his back and whispered, "You're not alone. We're together." My voice barely came out. My whole body was flushed red, but still I asked, "How does a man like you ever feel alone, Danny?" My voice was weak, almost trembling. Danny, with his damp hair and body, simply said, "Let's just say I finally found the right person at that moment." I kissed him again, wrapping my arms tightly around his neck. I pulled him closer against my body. My legs tensed and trembled. I leaned into his ear and whispered, "You know exactly what I want from you." It didn't take long before I felt the full weight of his body. He let himself go, stayed like that for a while, then stood up and looked at me. Seeing his big, strong body right in front of me was enough to excite me all over again. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about excitement, Danny was about to say. Something that would completely take me by surprise. "We leaving Daisy," he said, "you and me, both of us." He paused for a second, then added, "We're not going to spend the rest of our lives alone and without passion. I've already prepared everything: a cottage in a small town in England, far from America, far from Charles, close to each other, very close. What do you say?" Without thinking, I lifted my hands to my neck. Danny looked at my body again before locking his eyes onto mine, waiting for my answer. But I had already excited him again. Without hesitation, I said yes. "Let's go as soon as possible," I added. "I love you so much, Danny. Please let Tun go," I whispered. And we really were going to leave, but until we finally escaped Charles, these secret meetings were only going to get more and more thrilling. It didn't take long before we planned our first escape. It was set for the very next day. Charles was asleep at home when I quietly slipped out. This story isn't over yet. Make sure to follow and subscribe to my channel for the next part. Turn on notifications and leave a comment to stay ahead in these stories. Your support means everything. Thank you for listening this far.